Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar, Break Through the Noise, the Smart Strategy That Will Engage Any Audience, brought to you by the IABC Heritage Region. I'm Greg McCormick, Region Communication Chair. Today we have two guests who will share tips on creating content so compelling that your audiences will choose to opt in. How, you ask? They're going to share a strategy based on audience data that can inform the development of highly relevant and persuasive messaging. It's my pleasure to welcome Alison Davis and David Pitre. Alison is founder and CEO of Davis & Company, an employee communication firm that focuses on helping companies effectively reach, engage, and motivate their employees. She's an online columnist for the New York Times and frequently writes articles for leading business and trade publications. A seasoned blogger and author of several groundbreaking communication books, she also writes the Davis & Company blog and an online column for Inc. David is president of the firm and has developed its communication effectiveness model. He's an experienced speaker himself and workshop leader, as well as the author of several communication books. Before we begin, we have a couple housekeeping notes. I'd like to introduce Amy Miller, a region member and our tech associate for today's webinar. Amy will review a few quick points to help you gain the most from this experience. Amy?
Thank you, Greg. Everyone, if you would like to watch today's webinar in full screen mode, then mouse to the top right portion of your screen and you'll see two small arrows. Click on that symbol to toggle in and out of full screen mode. During the presentation, if you'd like to send us a question for discussion, please use the Q&A button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just mouse down to the bottom of your screen and your toolbar will appear, including the Q&A button. To help you think about possible questions, right now we're showing some thoughts that may spur ideas for you. Also, today's webinar is being recorded. As a registered attendee, you will receive the following: a link to our very brief survey as you leave the webinar. Please take a moment to respond so we can keep making improvements. You'll also get an email with links to today's webinar PDF, the presentation PDF, a recording of the session, the survey in case you missed it on your way out, a link to access a free new Davis & Company ebook, What's Next? 9 Ways to Reinvent Employee Communication, and a synopsis of the questions and answers from today's session. And now back to Greg.
Thank you, Amy. Let's get started. David, take it away.
Well, thank you, Greg and Amy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us. Let's start by sharing the screen. Okay, good. Excellent.
Excellent.
So thanks for taking the time to be with us. I also have a little bit of housekeeping, and I'm showing this page for those who, just in case they can't hear us, that there are audio settings on the bottom left. So just in case there are some people who can't hear the audio, for their advantage. Alison and I have lots of exercises built into this presentation. And so we'll often use the chat for that. So you may want to have that open. And as well, we have the other tool for Q&A, and separating your questions into the Q&A will help us keep track of them and answer them. So just make note of those two features that we'll be using throughout the session. Alison, you'll get us started. Oh, I forgot. I think Amy mentioned this, that we'll, after the session and the follow-up communication, we'll send you an offer to download our new ebook. It's called What's Next? 9 Ways to Reinvent Employee Communication. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. We're offering it to you at no charge.
Okay, so hi, it's Alison. Nice to see you all virtually. I know that all of us have been spending countless hours on virtual meetings, but we did want to kind of get you started and have you stop multitasking for a minute. So we've got a quick icebreaker. So David mentioned, please open your chat. And David, let's look at the first icebreaker question. Just share your organization and your role. Just, who are you? See, someone's already doing it. And what do you do? Oh, So the volume is low. You can hear me. So David will speak up. Here's Christina. And so who are you and who do you work for and what do you do? Great. And hopefully you can all see in chat. One of the advantages of doing this is that we have a big group today, which is terrific. So we can't obviously do introductions. So the advantage of doing this is to see who's on, and you can see we have people from lots of different organizations and lots of different roles, which is what we were hoping to do, because although David and I spend most of our time thinking about internal communication, many of the principles that we are going to share with you work for any audience. The principles are the same. So you guys are great. Thank you for participating. We have one other warm-up question. David? Something you've accomplished in 2020 at work that you're proud of. I know it's been a heck of a year for all of us, very, very challenging in many ways, but I am sure that all of us have done some wonderful things. And I think this is you may not be getting enough credit, but we'd like to give you credit. We'd like to give each other credit. So please share. And by the way, when you are sharing, if you could just make sure you're sharing for panelists and attendees so that everyone can see the chat. Otherwise, so there's a little button on the bottom of the chat window and you just click on it and say panelists and attendees so that everyone can share your successes. And we've got great successes. David, I don't know if you want to comment on some of those terrific things that people are doing.
Yeah, I see launched an intranet on Office 365. No small, excuse me, no small feat.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to get to some that were just sent to the panelists. There's a weekly email template, a full ebook.
4 commercials, terrific. Winning new clients when you can't meet anybody in person. And we've heard a lot about people who've started work when they can't even, obviously go into the office. Increased virtual meetings, certainly, and improved virtual meetings. We see a lot of that, which is terrific. Employee engagement, great stuff.
We see a few entries about stuff related specifically to the pandemic and ramping up communication during that time.
Yep. It's all good. Thank you for sharing. It's terrific. And remember, as you are chatting today, if you select panelists and attendees, and all of your colleagues, all of your friends at IABC can see what you've been up to, which is great. So that's our little warm up, and now we're going to just move on to what we're going to cover here today. That was actually the icebreaker. Then we have a warm up, so we have a lot of different temperatures here. So we're gonna do a little bit more to get us in the mode of breaking through the noise. Then we're going to share some advice that David and I have about breaking through the noise. You will have an opportunity to practice. I know often on webinars, as opposed to an in-person event, sometimes it's a little hard to apply what you've learned. So we're big fans of taking what we cover and say, let's just put it right to use, and then we will talk about your challenges in following some of the advice that we give. And remember, at any time, please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. If you have any comments, please feel free to use chat. Dave and I are both good multitaskers, so we'll be monitoring. Greg is also going to be checking the Q&A box, so mailbox. So we'll be addressing those questions as we go, and then as well at the end. Yeah, so David, over to you.
Thanks, Alison. And the green pencils are showing where we want your participation. So you're fairly warned. Okay, let's excuse me. Let's start with this warm up. We'll return to chat for this. And Alison and I are interested in a piece of content that caught your attention during this past week. So if you could enter that in chat, a piece of content that caught your attention. Make sure you select panelists and attendees so everyone can see.
Can be anything. Can be something in the news. Can be something, an offer that you got. Whatever is going to, whatever really like you paid attention
Stood
to.
out. Yeah.
And I'm going to type something in. Campaign rhetoric, yep, of course. Interesting, a number of these are some interesting data. And then we've got offers, an appeal. Jeffrey Toobin's story. Don't worry, David and I are going to keep our clothes on during this.
True.
TMI. Sorry about the Browns. My husband is a New England Patriots fan, so he's in mourning this week also. So I get it.
Okay. Now, just like we had last time in our icebreaker, we had a part 1 and a part 2, and we're doing the same with this warm up. So thanks for. Oh, now I really want to check out the Ocean Spray Fleetwood Mac Vinyl video. Okay, let's go on to part 2, which is tell us what made this content compelling.
And thank you, Rick, for sharing that link. And I'm just going to share it with everybody so they can see the. Because please don't check out the Ocean Spray TikTok while we're in this webinar. That's my please just wait till later.
So tell us why this piece of content that caught your attention. Why was it compelling to you?
Entertaining break from doom scrolling. Love that.
I like this notion of interactivity is interesting. Certainly, we know that that's one of the drivers of satisfaction, that ability to participate.
You know, there's, and David, I don't know if you want to turn up your volume. That's the second comment about maybe your
volume. Let me try switching away from AirPods to
those darn AirPods. You know, it's interesting that the way it was presented that alerted parents and students to the bullying problem. You know, there's a lot in when we look at what catches your attention. There's a surprise. Sometimes it's a surprising new low. Sometimes it's the surprise of Ocean Spray giving a truck, as Rick says. Sometimes it's a topic that is just interesting to you, or it's the way it's presented. Brian wrote written content augmented with great photos. You know, so there's just lots of interesting stuff ways that marketers, the media, politicians are trying to catch our attention. And this is just a slide that David and I put together. We often look at who are what sources are really good at catching your attention. You know, who really surprises you, who catches you, who gives you something that's visual, surprising, unique, appealing, of value to you. So one of the reasons we often will start a workshop like this, and we sometimes, we've done a lot in person when we're doing speaking, is because what works on you can use to appeal to others. So I mean, I'm constantly, David, I know you are too, constantly looking at kind of just paying attention to what gets my attention.
So I moved to computer audio. Is that working better?
It's much better.
Yeah, great. Okay, so inspiration every day from these sources. Alison, let's break into our 5 ways.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Before we do it, we have a valuable concept to share. So let's start there. You may remember Procter & Gamble's product, Mr. Clean. Sound familiar? Perhaps you've washed your floor with Mr. Clean. Well, many years ago, Procter & Gamble had a problem, and that is Mr. Clean sales were stagnant. They weren't going anywhere, and maybe even a little bit down. So as a result, they tried many things to try to boost the sales of Mr. Clean, changing the color, changing the scent. And you can see here, this bottle has a Febreze scent. So they did a lot of things. Sales changed a little bit, but then they would go back down, back flat. So the smart folks at P&G took a new look at this and approached this with a blank piece of paper. And they decided to go back to the drawing board and watch people wash their floors. Get out the mop, get out the bucket, and watch them clean those floors. And they asked them lots of questions while they were watching people clean their floors. How is this experience? What do you like about the mop? What do you hate about the mop? The water is dirty. I don't really understand if I'm getting my floors clean. So they gathered all of that data and feedback and brought it back to the office. There was a lot of brainstorming, a lot of prototyping, but in the end, that's how Swiffer was born. This notion of listening to their customers, watching them in action, and then developing a solution from a blank sheet of paper.
And David, just one thing about it, which is really important, is it has this kind of approach makes the assumption that you should make no assumptions. That, just because when you think about cleaning the floor, what you traditionally have visualized is a mop and a bucket and some cleaning solution, doesn't mean that's how you that's how you always have to think about cleaning a floor. So that blank canvas is called, David.
Yeah, here we are, design thinking. So it's the notion of understanding a user's needs and preferences so that you design those solutions to meet those needs and preferences. And then, of course, you refine. And this is a concept that we can apply directly to communication. It can help us break through. And it's one of the basic tenets of communication, that idea of knowing your audience and designing communication to fit their needs. Here's a great quote from Joe, the co-founder of Airbnb. To me, design thinking is about understanding the needs of the person you're designing for so you can create something that's valuable. I think that's a really great word, value. What we design, what we bring helps someone.
Yeah, and David, I find that in our work as communicators, that often what happens is we sort of get into the habit of basing what we do on what we've done before. I just got into a conversation with a client who had to do an organizational or asked for help on an organizational announcement, internal organizational announcement. And I said, well, what if we do it completely differently? And she's kind of very automatically said, but that's how we do it. We always do it that way. And I just said, why? If you want people to actually pay attention to this announcement, what if we approached it completely differently? And that, she's a smart person, but she had to think about that for a minute. So the core of design thinking is just because you've done it one way doesn't mean you have to do it that way again. And especially is relevant, I think, in this world we're living in with so much coming at us in the exercise we did a few minutes ago. Endless scrolling, 24-hour news cycles, lots and lots of offers, all that stuff coming at us. When we think about turning that and saying, how do we get through to the audience we want to get through to? Challenging our own assumptions, I think, is a great way to start.
And certainly we saw lots of new approaches and new ways of getting things done during the first few months of the pandemic. Lots of experimenting, which was really great. And that's the other part of design thinking to me that's critical, is this idea of prototyping, trying things on, and then making changes based on feedback.
Yep.
Okay.
And
sorry.
So no, that's fine. What I was going to say is one of my long-term clients who I admire very much says the way that he's been able to make change in his organization is he says, let's try something. Let's run a pilot. Let's see if it works. And then everybody sort of calms down because he's taking the fear a little bit, the anxiety out of change. So everybody goes, okay, well, yeah, we could try it. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. So let's get into our, based on that premise of design thinking, we have 5 ideas to share with you. I think I go first, right, David?
That is correct.
So one of the things, and you may, if you've done marketing, if you're in marketing, if you're in marketing communications, even if you're in media relations, you may have used personas to think about your audience. We use it a lot in internal communication. We see it a lot less there, but it's a great way to go. And the sort of classic way of using personas can be very rigorous exercise where you have to start with all these demographics about your audience. You have to do a lot of data analysis, but we're talking about quick personas here. We don't want to suggest anything that's like too complicated. And quick personas work just as well as the more rigorous sort of methodology for personas. The premise is just that if you can envision who you're communicating with and begin to think a little bit about who these people are and some key insights about them, then you can do a better job at choosing how to communicate and choosing what your messages are, what your kind of delivery is. So we're just showing you 3 people. Here's a young woman on her phone. Here's somebody reading a newspaper, or whatever those are, drinking coffee, and here's somebody working in a manufacturing environment. So when we think about these people, David, the next is kind of questions. This is, again, very quick. What does this person need that relates to what you're trying to achieve? What does he or she care about? How does he or she prefer to receive communication? And what challenges do you face in breaking through? We often use personas in an exercise with our colleagues. If we're starting a project, recently we did this kind of exercise to communicate some benefits, open enrollment, and really thought a lot about the fact that in this particular organization, there are some people in sales, there are other people in a knowledge worker kind of people. I used to say in the office, but working from home. There's others who are in manufacturing, and we did this personas to say, okay, well, what are the best ways to get through to those people? Because we need them to make some decisions about their 2021 benefits. And the answer is not necessarily the same for all of those different groups. So let's make sure that we see whether there are any differences, both in terms of how we shape our messages and our communication, and also the methods that we use to communicate with them.
And when you develop these personas, Alison, the result is often a good thing to share with someone who is your client, whether it's a colleague or a senior leader or someone like that. It's a good way to help him or her understand why you've approached communication in a certain way. Remind that person about the people that you're trying to communicate with.
Because they may be trapped inside their own experience, which often happens. They also may have the cursive expertise. They may say, well, everybody knows this, everybody knows that about this particular topic. And a great example of that was we worked a number of years ago for an insurance company, and the senior executive said, well, we've been talking about the strategy for years. So of course, everyone knows what our strategy is. And when we went back and said, okay, let's just look at a few demographics, few personas. One of the personas was people who work in call centers, and their length of the tenure is only 10 months. So they have a lot of churn, a lot of people coming in and out of the organization. And even if the strategy had been communicated, they might not have been there to hear it. And there's lots of external examples about that too. You get new customers, you may have new people in the media, you may have new people in social media. So it's interesting to begin to look at that, look at those kind of demographic factors or psychographic factors that all factor into the persona.
And we like keeping the persona tight to these 4 questions so that you don't go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out the crazy details of personas and getting bogged down in that. The idea, as Alison said at the beginning, is quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exhaustive. It's meant to be, sort of a quality analysis, not necessarily a quantifiable type of thing.
Yeah. Shall we go on to number 2?
Let's do that.
Okay.
So why are we showing you magazine covers? We're showing you magazine covers because magazines and other media are very good at emphasizing benefits. Again, this is a kind of a tenet of marketing for many, many years is don't talk about the features, talk about the benefits. So doesn't matter how many, how many computer chips there are in a high-tech washing machine. What matters is that this washing machine will clean your clothes. It's a classic example. So again, in the days when I would travel a lot and I would be standing in the airport, I would always go into the gift shop and look at magazines, because what you can see is how benefit-oriented magazines, I mean, Fast Company, great example, Secrets of the Most Productive People. Well, I'd like to be more productive. I'd like to have sexy hair. I'd like to drop some weight, all those things. I'd like to do all of those things. So, it's just a really great appeal to people's self-interest, which is a great way to appeal to people. So, this is just a little bit of an example, but move from details that you care about or your internal clients care about or your actual clients care about to content that is helpful, useful for your audience. And David mentioned a few minutes ago, using personas to get people out of their own head. And again, this is moving from, hey, I'd like to tell you this, to I'd like to share something that interests you. Again, very fundamental, but sometimes in the course of our roles as communicators, what happens is, we sort of get caught up in what somebody we're supporting wants to say. So rather than here are the summary, for example, of Q2 results, what Q2 results mean for hitting our goals this year or making our targets. Here's 7 features that make this service extraordinary. This is the one way that this will help you do X, whatever X is. Just a reminder, as we go through here, we've got lots of time for questions. Please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, or if you'd prefer, we're watching chat as well.
Yeah, so let's go on to number 3, which is use your words and perhaps choose them wisely. And I want to give you an example of what we mean by this. So some of you may remember on April 20th, something occurred that was really unprecedented in the history of the financial markets, which is that the price of oil went negative. And here are what several financial news outlets said. I'm just going to read this quickly. Commodity futures need to be standardized and tied to a physical delivery point, which in this case was overwhelmed. There was a little bit more there. And here's another one. The front part of the oil futures curve, which is the May contract that expires on Tuesday, was hit the hardest since it applies to fuel. You get the point.
Yeah, I think you would have trouble breathing, David, if you kept trying to read that.
But you read those 2 statements, and certainly you have to read them perhaps a couple of times, and you might still scratch your head as to what this means. And Rick, yes, eyes glazed over. What the heck is this? So I would like to introduce you to a fellow who responded differently to this problem that was happening. His name, Matt Levine, and he's a Bloomberg columnist and author of Money Stuff newsletter. And in his newsletter, he wrote, in his subject line, he wrote, "There's nowhere to put the oil." And then in the body, oil is voluminous and oozy and poisonous and flammable and smelly. People put a price on oil. They think it has value and want to own it at that value, but they also put a price on not having it. So he, in very simple terms, helped us understand the challenge here and the part of the reason that the price went negative. So words mean a lot, and they can help us understand. And Maggie, yes, isn't that much less painful to read and evocative too? Who would think that writing about financial stuff could stir emotions? But he does a good job of it.
Yeah, he's a good person to read. And David, the other part of choosing your words is thinking about the words that people use in everyday language. And a good sort of model for this is if you're going to Google something, Google a question, what words would you use? An example that I use a lot in internal communication is HR people like to talk about compensation, but I as an employee want to know how I'm going to be paid. So I don't necessarily think of it as compensation. I think of it as pay. So that's a choice of words that matters a lot, because if I was going to Google something, I would say, how does this company pay? Not necessarily what does this company offer in compensation. So that sort of Google model of, what's searchable to people also helps you do things like write subject lines, because you want the subject line to have the word that will really resonate with people.
Also, I'll back up a little bit. In our Q&A, some folks have put in some questions around our first point, which is around personas.
Yep.
Leslie asked around good data points to use for quick personas when leadership asks for them. She wrote, for example, how do you know male millennials won't like email newsletters? Something like that. So those, what are those good data sources? And likely depends on the type of communication we're talking about. So certainly internally, we know that there's lots of data sitting within HR. Tenure was an example that Alison gave earlier. Where are our employees clustered? What are the age groups? Things like that. Levels.
And that information is also often available in an external basis too. You have some data about different demographics and different audiences. I think that often when doing personas, you are making a few assumptions. I mean, we can't, obviously there are some millennials who like e-newsletters and some who don't, but really the purpose is again to get people out of their own narrow frame of reference, the people you're trying to influence within your organization or your clients. So I'm not a millennial, clearly. And so I may think, hey, those millennials, they don't like to work too hard to get information. And then, my daughter-in-law can tell me everything about, she's a scientist, but she can also tell me everything about the Kardashians. And she spends a lot of time on finding out what the Kardashians are doing. So I don't know as much about millennials as perhaps I would like to. So I think it's important if you were trying to approach me and say, here's how we should communicate, to get me out of my own experience.
Yeah, and I think a lot too on the personas that you develop will depend a lot on your communication objective. And so Donna put in, how have you approached quick personas, job type, location, age? To me, it really depends on that communication objective. For example, if I'm communicating about pension issues, age is certainly a factor there, because someone who is closer to retirement may or will have different interests than someone who is just starting his or her career. So then we know that age will play a big factor in those personas. Whereas if I'm talking about a new service that my company is offering, that service, the age may not play a role in that service.
Yep, and so there are lots of sources available for summary data. For example, I mean, even something like the U.S. The Bureau of Labor and Statistics has lots of good data about demographics across the United States. There's other sources like that. Really just depends. I mean, I was just thinking, David, about something that we do as a firm where when we think about our clients, many of our clients are communicators, but many other of our clients may be work in HR or work lead initiatives or are in IT or in different roles. So, we if we're doing personas for ourselves, we will kind of pick the big buckets that we think are most important if we're trying to reach those people.
Great.
Okay, go. Keep going.
So let's go on to number 4 then.
Yes.
Little delay. There we go. So number 4 is about simplify, and this is probably one of the biggest challenges when it comes to communication, because we often have clients or stakeholders, people we're working with, who really want to load that communication up, whatever that is. And simplification is one of the great ways to break through, to help your reader, watcher, whatever the situation is, engage. So I have 4 tips to help with that. And so let's go through those. So first of all, I love this idea of finding the star of your communication. And what I mean by that is, what is the one thing you want your audience to know, do, or feel? Don't come up with 29 things, but think of that one thing and eliminate all the extras. That really goes a long way to simplification. Get to the point faster. This is I think one of the, certainly in corporate communication, something that I see a lot is at the bottom, you finally find the message that you hoped would be in the first sentence of that communication. And a really good example that has stayed with me is many years ago, I was conducting focus groups for a financial organization with managers of others. And one of these managers said to me, our CEO asks me to deliver all of my points to him in 3 bullets or fewer. And he said, why can't I get that? So I thought in that little piece of feedback has stuck with me, because I think it's true. Why can't he have the communication in 3 bullets or fewer? And I like this idea of using the fewest words possible and replacing words with visuals. When approaching a communication piece, I try to imagine, well, what if this wasn't written? What if it wasn't expressed in words? How would we go about expressing it? Is it a graphic? Is it a visual? Is it a piece of animation? How could we do it without words? If you have in the before time, if you've ever toured museums, they're really good at this, helping us understand a topic or a theme, something complicated in as few words as possible. And while it may feel a little counterintuitive, sticking to the 7th grade reading level is an important trick. And it's not that we're dumbing down content, it's that we're making it easier to consume. And that's because the 7th grade reading level gives us simpler words and shorter sentences and paragraphs, and it makes it faster. It makes it faster to read, faster to get through, and increases retention.
And we had a comment a few minutes ago that just to us panelists, I'd like to share it with when David was showing the journalist, Mr. Levine. Why can't I think of his first name? It said the comment was, agree about the readability, but don't you think it's void of substantive content? And I think that's something that directly relates to the points that David's making on simplified. For me, simplifying is not about, it's not because my audience isn't smart, it's because I'm trying to be courteous to them and help them. I have a friend who says, never overestimate people's knowledge or underestimate their intelligence. So 7th grade reading level to me is actually something that I try to get to as close as I can to, even if I'm talking to research scientists in a pharmaceutical company, even if I'm talking to people in academia in a university. So That's interesting. And here's a related question. Shouldn't the grading reading level depend on the audience, USA Today versus Wall Street Journal? David, I can take that, or you want to take it?
Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because if you could get your hands on a Wall Street Journal 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the grade reading level is actually much higher than it is today. So every media is simplifying their language to deal with today's very busy, very distracted audiences.
And I think that, earlier we showed our snippets from media around the oil situation, and Rick commented, eyes glazed over. And to me, that summarizes it all. You get a dense piece of text, and it does not invite you to read it. So thinking about seventh grade is a way to break through that.
And I will say that seventh grade is often very difficult to achieve, but I do find that putting my writing or my content through the Microsoft Word reading Fleischman, I always get it slightly wrong, through that test is tremendously eye-opening. And I have used it. Thank you so much, Leslie. Fleisch Kincaid. I have used it so often with my stakeholders to say, hey, this is at the 13th grade level, which is not stuff that I've written, of course, but the stuff that was provided. Do people are you going to create? I like to use the word friction. Are you creating friction for the people you're trying to reach? Are you making it difficult for them to get to the information you need to convey to them? And if the grade level is too high, that's a lot of friction. If the communication is too long, if the words used are just require too much thinking to get what you're talking about, all that creates friction.
And here, I think it's important to remember that we're talking about breaking through. Reading level may change when you're getting into a workshop situation or something like that, a teaching situation. But certainly when we want to break through, this is a technique to get there. And
somebody commented, oh, I think that was Greg. The detail can be, you can still provide details. It's not as if you can't, but it can be a link, or it can be further down, or it can be deeper in. So for those people who really want to get that kind of granular detail, sure, absolutely, as a courtesy to them, make sure it's available to them. But don't stop everyone else, all those casual, quick readers from sort of entering where you want them to enter by creating barriers.
Yeah, nice point, Leslie. Leslie talks about Fauci and his simplicity. And the power of graphic designers to reduce very complicated thoughts. Someone mentioned earlier that a piece of content that captured their attention were basically the heat maps of the virus, and those are really simple methods of simplifying this very complicated content.
There are some great quotes by Albert Einstein about simplicity, and one of them is, everything should be just the right level of simplicity. Not more complicated, not more simple, just the right. And you'll know what that is. Okay, so our number 5 thing, and we're moving along here, is start a conversation. And I mean 2 things by this. One is conversational language always works better than formal language. So, David and I have tried to exemplify that in terms of just being very conversational in our choice of language. And the other is in today's world, people they don't want to be talked to, they want to be spoken with. So David, if you move to the next one, the core strategy is to involve your audience, ask people to participate. So it's approachable, you're inviting an exchange. Asking questions is a great way to start a conversation. Asking for suggestions, that's what number 3 is about, saying, hey, what do you think? What would you suggest we do? So this is a little unusual to have this in kind of a, when you think about getting people's attention, but also when you go back to what in our opening exercise and our warm-up exercise, when we said what appeals to you, what I saw among many of your comments were, hey, it was engaging. It was something, you know, it felt like it was, somebody was starting something with me. That it was something that appealed to me and that I could be involved with. So it's again, very different than talking at. It's, hey, we're engaged together in this communication. It's not just one way. Okay, so is everybody ready? Lots of good questions so far. Here's an opportunity for us to practice. What we're going to do is we're going to share a scenario with you, and here it is, very simple. You're head of communication for a medical equipment manufacturer, and during the pandemic, your organization has donated some products to frontline healthcare workers in retirement homes, and now the CEO says, hey, this is great. We need to share the good work we're doing in the community. So David, did you skip one?
Yes, sorry, that jumped.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're just going to, again, in chat. So let's say that you are, you're a media. So you're a member of the media. What would appeal to you about, David has, by the way, the scenario is in chat, so you can refer back to it. So again, we're taking things from the audience's perspective. You are a member of the media. What would you want to know about this that would grab your attention? So here's Pat has the first one. Tell the story of someone who benefited. Great. So it's not just the CEO talking, right? I'm a member of the media. I want to know. Andy says, what is the impact? Where? Great.
Yep, Kelly's quantifying who.
Quantifying. Who has helped and how? Great. Start with why. Why is this important? What did it matter? You know, I love this message from Sandra, keeping frontline workers safe. Testimonials, terrific. Show me the people who are helped. These are great. What's the device? Good question. What is it? It's a fictional situation. We don't know.
Let's go to the community, Alison.
Yeah, so the community is, now we're trying to get your attention. You're a member of the community. So what would grab your attention about this story? Right? It could be the same, it could be different than the media. Show workers using the products, who and how is great. What's in it for me? So how did you help? How can you help me? Location is important. Can I get it too? Terrific. How you can give to. So those are two things. How do you benefit directly, and also how can you participate? Storytelling is great. Love that.
Okay, and then let's try one final audience, which is employees. So
now we're saying, hey, why should employees care about this? What do employees want to know? Reputation of the company, absolutely.
Oh, that's nice, Diane. Did I work on it? That's nice. How you contributed creating that line of sight.
Okay. Employees are making this happen. Yeah, I love that. Make it about you. By the way, you is one of the most compelling words in terms of getting people's attention. Here's how you can help. Here's how this affects you. Here's what you need to do. That's all good.
Okay.
Intrinsic reward, terrific. Those are great.
Let's go to, we want to leave enough time for some open Q&A. So let's go to the final part of this, and imagine you're writing an email for one of those audiences we just covered. And what would your subject line be? And if you're in the chat, if you use chat to tell us what your subject line would be, if you can write down which audience, whether it's media, community, or employees, put a colon and then put your subject line. This is a good chance to practice all of those techniques.
And helpful hint on this one, many of you have essentially already started your subject line. and it's actually a great exercise for creating a subject line. If you start by saying, what do people want to know about this? You may have already written your subject line. There you go. Employees, how we made a difference. Great. Lives saved. Great. Andy, we might add to that, somebody had a comment before about needing to know the location. So, in Cleveland, here's how here's how lives were saved, or wherever the location is. You made this happen. Great. Yep. It's terrific. Some good news. Bob, I think that would be something that everyone would appeal to everyone right now. Here we are. It's still in October. 2020 is still going on. How is this possible?
Yeah, and Jennifer, I like this idea of using that magic word "you."
And 3 ways is great, by the way. That's another terrific techniques. The idea of here's 2 things you need to know, or here's 1 thing you need to know, here's a number, is very appealing.
Okay, so let's get to some Q&A. If you have questions that you'd like to submit in the Q&A, please feel free. And Alison and I will respond. And while that's happening, we're interested to know your challenges of approaching content this way. So in the chat, tell us what gets in the way of using these techniques that Alison and I are proposing to address your audience's needs and preferences.
Compliance, yeah. Yeah, and probably we would add to that our friends in the legal department.
Alison, there were some questions that were submitted before when people registered. And one of them was, would love to learn more about connecting personas to dispersed workforces without easy access to technology or even email.
Yeah. I think that speaks to also the assumption problem that we often have, that because we as communicators are sitting at a desk and going on virtual meetings and very wired in, we may make an assumption that everyone is that way. And there was a very interesting story in one of the many media outlets that I follow, I think it was in the Washington Post, about how in rural America, it's still very difficult to get broadband. So just a way of saying, hey, if that's your audience, if you have customers or people you're trying to sell to in rural environments, then video is probably not going to work too well. So
I like that Matt wrote, one of the challenges is being decision makers who are highly technical and don't believe in this stuff. Certainly there's if usually I find with that kind of person, there's a lot of proof in the data, what kinds of stories get hits, for example. And Alison, it reminds me of the time that we did some work with a communication team on improving their subject lines and the differences we saw in readership based on making those changes.
Yeah. I also find that interesting enough, sometimes you have to know your stakeholder, because we have brought data in sometimes to a senior executive, and it hasn't worked as well as having comments from focus groups, some verbatims from focus groups, where people said things like, I don't have time to read these emails because of the nature of my work. I would like to learn more about this, but I simply don't have time, to do it. And that was a verbatim, and it really kind of shook up the stakeholder to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe we do need to think about this differently. And Andy, you're right. Clients think they are the customer, and almost always they're not. I mean, one of my little riffs is, if you're a senior executive, you drive a very nice car, you go to a very nice office, or you have a very nice home office, your experience is going to be very different than a lot of the people who you're communicating with.
And I like that idea, Alison, of thinking of that person that you're communicating with as the customer, and that senior VP of blah, blah, blah as your client, right?
Yeah.
It changes the dynamics and might even help that person think differently. There's one question I think we could answer before we wrap up, which is from Aaron. In this virtual environment, our associates are starting to get overwhelmed by communicating by email, too many emails. Any suggestions, ?
Yeah, I mean, we're always constantly trying to create a mix of different, whatever channels you have available. The other side of the coin, Sandra, is correct. There may be too many channels. But again, I love the idea of running a pilot, of trying different things. And we have a client who's asked us to help them create some podcasts, because what they've heard is that they've heard from their employees that, that they would like to listen to a podcast while dusting or something like that. So I think it's very interesting to always be looking at everything available, mix it up, as Diane says. Mixing it up is a great way of going.
Greg and Amy, back to you.
All right, thank you, Alison and David, for bringing us these insights. And now I'm ready to ask anyone if they have any questions they want to submit. Please go ahead and use the Q&A tool. So far, you've done an excellent job of answering every pre-submitted, submitted during the session, and post-session question. Right now, we're just waiting for any fresh questions to come in.
And Greg, thanks. And just to let everyone know, we are going to be taking this chat and kind of cleaning up a little bit and offering it to all of you. So if we see any other questions, or if you have any other questions you want to ask, even in chat or in Q&A, we can either answer those in the few minutes we have left, or we can answer them later. And also, we make we're going to make the presentation available to you. David's and my contact information is on there. We're both also on LinkedIn. You can always reach out to us. Happy to answer any questions you have, or continue the conversation even after this workshop.
Yeah, here's a couple questions that came in just a moment ago, and
Great.
we have about 2 minutes left. So any great resources you'd recommend to help improve my subject lines, get better at writing compelling ones?
We have a workshop for that.
We have a workshop for that. You know what we do have a lot of, if you go to our website, we have a number of blogs written by I've written some, my colleagues have written some, and some of them are on headlines and subject lines. We also have a guide on writing headlines, which is very similar. All of those resources are free. So davisandco.com. Please visit us. Please take advantage of those free resources.
And then the other question there, what best practice can you share to build personas, surveys, interviews, etc.?
I like to use everything that you have. I mean, you may not have good survey data, but you may have great demographic information. Somebody in your organization may have done some focus groups. There may be publicly available information, such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But my attitude is whatever is available to you is going to help you.
And I think the other part of that, Alison, is quickly available to you.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes that quick might be just having a nice conversation or an interview with someone, so that you can get a little bit of that detail.
All right, we do need to wrap it up there. I want to thank you again both for talking with us. And I just remind people, if you'd like to cite Alison and David's work or collaborate with them on a communication, please reach out to them directly and secure their approval before you do so. As we part, I wanted to give everyone a reminder on a couple quick notes. First, if you have more questions for David or Alison, you can contact them at the email address shown on the slide. Please complete the survey that'll open as you exit. Watch your email for details on our next region webinar coming on November 10th. We'll focus on some of the specialized volunteer opportunities that are available to you in the region. And then, of course, if you'd like to present a future webinar, email the IABC Heritage Region using the contact information on the slide. Finally, if you'd like to learn about IABC membership benefits, including member month discounts, go to iabc.com/membership. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.